to a successful issue, I shall have done very well for myself. We shall have benefited one another mutually. Come now, Miss Bellingham, I appeal to you. We have eaten salt together, to say nothing of pigeon pie and other cakes. Won't you back me up, and at the same time do a kindness to Dr. Berkeley? Why is Dr. Berkeley interested in our decision? Certainly he is, as you will appreciate when I tell you that he actually tried to bribe me secretly out of his own pocket. Did you? She asked, looking at me with an expression that rather alarmed me. Well, not exactly, I replied, mighty hot and uncomfortable, and wishing Thorndyke at the devil with his confidences. I merely mentioned that the solicitor's costs, you know, and that sort of thing. But you needn't jump on me, Miss Bellingham. Dr. Thorndyke did all that was necessary in that way. She continued to look at me thoughtfully as I stammered out my excuses, and then said, I wasn't going to. I was only thinking that poverty has its compensations. You are all so very good to us, and for my part, I should accept Dr. Thorndyke's generous offer most gratefully and thank him for making it so easy for us. Very well, my dear, said Mr. Bellingham. We will enjoy the sweets of poverty, as you say. We have sampled the other kind of thing pretty freely, and do ourselves the pleasure of accepting a great kindness, most delicately offered. Thank you, said Thorndyke. You have justified my faith in you, Miss Bellingham, and in the power of Dr. Berkeley's salt. I understand that you place your affairs in my hands? Entirely and thankfully, replied Mr. Bellingham. Whatever you think best to be done, we agree to beforehand. Then, said I, let us drink success to the cause. Port, if you please, Miss Bellingham. The vintage is not recorded, but it is quite wholesome, and a suitable medium for the sodium chloride of friendship. I filled her glass, and when the bottle had made its circuit, we stood up and solemnly pledged the new alliance. There is just one thing I would say before we dismiss the subject for the present, said Thorndyke. It is a good thing to keep one's own counsel. When you get formal notice from Mr. Hurst's solicitors that proceedings are being commenced, you may refer them to Mr. Marchmont of Gray's Inn, who will nominally act for you. He will actually have nothing to do, but we must preserve the fiction that I am instructed by a solicitor. Meanwhile, and until the case goes into court, I think it very necessary that neither Mr. Jellicoe nor anyone else should know that I am connected with it. We must keep the other side in the dark, if we can. We will be as secret as the grave, said Mr. Bellingham. And, as a matter of fact, it will be quite easy, since it happens, by a curious coincidence, that I am already acquainted with Mr. Marchmont. He acted for Stephen Blackmore, you remember, in that case that you unraveled so wonderfully. I knew the Blackmores. Did you? Said Thorndyke. What a small world it is! And what a remarkable affair that was! The intricacies and cross issues made it quite absorbingly interesting, and it is noteworthy for me in another respect, for it was one of the first cases in which I was associated with Dr. Jervis. Yes, and a mighty useful associate I was, remarked Jervis, though I did pick up one or two facts by accident. And, by the way, the Blackmore case had certain points in common with your case, Mr. Bellingham. There was a disappearance and a disputed will, and the man who vanished was a scholar and an antiquarian. Cases in our specialty are apt to have certain general resemblances, Thorndyke said, and as he spoke he directed a keen glance at his junior, the significance of which I partly understood when he abruptly changed the subject. The newspaper reports of your brother's disappearance, Mr. Bellingham, were remarkably full of detail. There were even plans of your house and that of Mr. Hurst. Do you know who supplied the information? No, I don't, replied Mr. Bellingham. I know that I didn't. Some newspaper man came to me for information, but I sent them packing. So I understand did Hurst. As for Jellicoe, you might as well cross-examine an oyster. Well, said Thorndyke, the pressmen have queer methods of getting copy, but still, someone must have given them that description of your brother and those plans. It would be interesting to know who it was. However, we don't know, and now let us dismiss these legal topics with suitable apologies for having introduced them. And perhaps, said I, we may as well adjourn to what we call the drawing-room. It is really Barnard's den, and leave the housekeeper to wrestle with the debris. We migrated to the cheerfully shabby little apartment, and when Mrs. Gummer had served coffee with gloomy resignation, as who should say, "If you should drink this sort of stuff, I suppose you must, but don't blame me for the consequences," I settled Mr. Bellingham in Barnard's favorite lopsided easy-chair, the depressed seat of which suggested its customary use by an elephant of sedentary habits, and opened the diminutive piano. "I wonder if Miss Bellingham would give us a little music?" I said. "I wonder if she could," was the smiling response. "Do you know," she continued, "I have not touched a piano for nearly 2 years. It will be quite an interesting experiment to me, but if it fails you will be the sufferers, so you must choose." "My verdict," said Mr. Bellingham, "is fiat experimentum, though I won't complete the quotation, as that would seem to disparage Dr. Barnard's piano. But before you begin, Ruth, there is one rather disagreeable matter that I want to dispose of, so that I may not disturb the harmony with it later." He paused, and we all looked at him expectantly. "I suppose, Dr. Thorndyke," he said, "you read the newspapers?" "I don't," replied Dr. Thorndyke, "but I ascertain for purely business purposes what they contain." "Then," said Mr. Bellingham, "you have probably met with some accounts of the finding of certain human remains, apparently portions of a mutilated body." "Yes, I have seen those reports and filed them for future reference." "Exactly. Well, now it can hardly be necessary for me to tell you that those remains, the mutilated remains of some poor murdered creature, as there can be no doubt they are, have seemed to have a very dreadful significance for me. You will understand what I mean. And I want to ask you if they have made a similar suggestion to you." Thorndyke paused before replying, with his eyes bent thoughtfully on the floor, and we all looked at him anxiously. "It's very natural," he said at length, "that you should associate these remains with the mystery of your brother's disappearance. I should like to say that you are wrong in doing so, but if I did I should be uncandid. There are certain facts that do, undoubtedly, seem to suggest a connection, and up to the present there are no definite facts of a contrary significance." Mr. Bellingham sighed deeply and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It is a horrible affair," he said huskily. "Horrible. Would you mind, Dr. Thorndyke, telling us just how the matter stands in your opinion? What the probabilities are, for and against?" Again Thorndyke reflected a while, and it seemed to me that he was not very willing to discuss the subject. However, the question had been asked pointedly, and eventually he answered: "At the present stage of the investigation it is not very easy to state the balance of probabilities. The matter is still quite speculative. The bones which have been found hitherto, for we are dealing with a skeleton, not with a body, have been exclusively those which are useless for personal identification, which is in itself a rather curious and striking fact. The general character and dimensions of the bones seem to suggest a middle-aged man of about your brother's height, and the date of deposition appears to be in agreement with the date of his disappearance." "It is known, then, when they were deposited?" asked Mr. Bellingham. "In the case of those found at Sidcup, it seems possible to deduce an approximate date. The watercress bed was cleaned out about 2 years ago, so they could not have been lying there longer than that, and their condition suggests that they could not have been there much less than 2 years, as there is apparently no vestige of the soft structures left. Of course, I am speaking from the newspaper reports only. I have no direct knowledge of the matter." "Have they found any considerable part of the body yet? I haven't been reading the papers myself. My little friend, Miss Oman, brought a great bundle of them for me to read, but I couldn't stand it. I pitched the whole boiling of them out of the window." I thought I detected a slight twinkle in Thorndyke's eye, but he answered quite gravely: "I think I can give you the particulars from memory, though I won't guarantee the dates. The original discovery was made, apparently quite accidentally, at Sidcup on the 15th of July. It consisted of a complete left arm, minus the third finger and including the bones of the shoulder blade, and collar bone. This discovery seems to have set the local population, especially the juvenile part of it, searching all the ponds and streams in the neighborhood." "Cannibals!" interjected Mr. Bellingham. "With the result that there was dredged up out of a pond near St. Mary Cray, in Kent, a right thigh bone. There is a slight clue to identity in respect of this bone, since the head of it has a small patch of eburnation. That is a sort of porcelain-like polish that occurs on the parts of bone that form a joint when the natural covering of cartilage is destroyed by disease. It is produced by the unprotected surface of the bone grinding against the similarly unprotected surface of another." "And how," Mr. Bellingham asked, "would that help in the identification?" "It would indicate," Thorndyke replied, "that the deceased had probably suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, what is commonly known as rheumatic gout, and he would probably have limped slightly and complained of some pain in the right hip." "I'm afraid that doesn't help us very much," said Mr. Bellingham. "For, you see, John had a pretty pronounced limp from another cause, an old injury to his left ankle. And as to complaining of pain, well, he was a hardy old fellow and not much given to making complaints of any kind. But don't let me interrupt you.